one of the first things that we can look at when we open Storyboard Pro 20 is obviously the splash screen that lets you create a new project or open recent projects or access your computer or the network through open project over here. The create a new project area of the splash screen allows you to choose the resolution that you would like to work into. For Storyboard Pro 20, you can go as high as 8K, as low as you want to, and you can, of course, change the resolution of your project as you're working or at a later stage, as long as you don't have too many files that may not be at the right resolution. It's not going to be an issue at all. But one of the first things that we can already see as a new feature in Storyboard Pro 20 is this new area here called color space. Now, Storyboard Pro 20 allows you to incorporate a color space management within your scene, natively in your scene. That means that you can choose the color space that you would like to work on from the start. And you've got a whole bunch of choices over here, anything from linear to obviously Rec 2020 being quite popular. So this is in case you need to especially integrate your storyboard with other softwares that have specific color space management. And if you would like to obviously share your production or your storyboard with other pieces within the pipeline. And so you can choose from the beginning to set your color space management. Of course, you can change that later as well. If you go into the settings within Storyboard Pro, you can change your color space management of your scene, but you can also set it from the beginning. So let's open up a blank project. And we're going to start by looking at the user interface. The user interface is very easy. It's very obvious. You can see big windows. You can see tabs here that you can move around. You can have your tools at the top. You can have the tools on the side as well. You can customize all of this. All these panels are customizable as well. You can move them around. You can close them. You can reopen them. And all of this can be saved. And you should be able to open the workspace of your choice to maximize the flow in which you would like to work and operate. We've got a couple of workspaces that are preset workspaces already by default, starting from the drawing workspace, which allows you obviously to focus on the drawing of your board, and which also allows you to see your thumbnails at the bottom here, which will be then the building block of your storyboard. And obviously you have also the panels on the side here. So one of the first things that you would probably do when you first start building a storyboard from scratch is the fact that you might bring in a script. You could, of course, start from scratch completely and start typing. So for example, in the storyboard tab over here, you can actually start typing a script if you would like to, and it will absolutely be fine. But you could also import existing scripts. And existing scripts, anything works from TXT to RTF, or even you can import final draft files as well, if you are working with final draft. If you do so, it will actually take all the settings from final draft in terms of the structure with the scenes and the panels and the shots, and all of that will be kept as well. So you're not just bringing the script, you will also be bringing the structure of your script inside of Storyboard Pro straight away. In this instance, we've imported a TXT. Okay, so here it is. We've got our script, and now we can start building our storyboard from the script. So we can look at the first line. It's about a race, obviously. We continue on wide, a flat desert land into a green forested area. So let's start building something like that. To help me build this board, I'm going to make use of the library. Now, the library is something really, really powerful within Storyboard Pro because anything that you create or that you bring inside of Storyboard Pro can be saved into the library as templates and be reused at any time or by anyone that has access to that folder or that library. And for instance, and that can be anything, it can be a single drawing, it can be a scene, it can be a video, it can be an image with multi-layers, it can be sounds, anything at all. And throughout this demonstration, you will see me actually bringing elements inside our board. And for instance, here we brought in the flat desert. Okay, so here we've got the flat desert, and we're going to use that as a background. I'm going to put it at the back here. As you can see, we've got layers within our board as well, within the drawing area. You can have as many layers as you want to, and you can move these layers up and down to represent, foreground or background as well. I'm also going to bring in a rough drawing of a rock because I'm going to be drawing over that as my drawing skills are slightly lacking. So I wanted to mention that because in case you are like me, you don't need to be intimidated with Storyboard Pro. It is very, very easy to use, and you can actually get to a pretty good result, not even if you don't have amazing drawing skills, and you can still create your board. Okay, so we brought our two elements. Now let's go into the drawing tools. So in terms of the drawing tools, we've got all the tools that we need on the side here. Again, you can customize this. And we've got essentially two types of drawing engines. We've got the vector engine and we've got the bitmap engine. And both can cohabitate in the same drawing, in the same panel, in the same project, very, very easily. And you can create vector and bitmap. You can import vector and bitmap inside of Storyboard Pro absolutely fine. Let's start with the brush tool. And when I click on the brush tool over here and go to the tool properties, you can see that we've got a couple of properties there in terms of presets, which were already pre-saved. Also, the tools of the properties of that specific tool by clicking on this arrow over here, and you go inside all the choices that you've got for changing your brush. For instance, you've got maximum size, minimum size. That will be obviously for the size of your brush, and maximum would be as the maximum pressure on your tablet, and minimum would be the minimum pressure. So if I start drawing here and I add more pressure, you can see my line gets thicker and thinner, and that's what the maximum and minimum size would be. So I'm going to bring them at a nice differential here. You can also set up the pen tilt sensitivity as well. If your pen can tilt, the rotation of the pen if you're using one of the latest art pens, hardness, spacing, all kinds of things that you can play around with here. So let's start first of all by drawing something over there, and you'll see straight away that I'm drawing on a new layer there, and you can see what it looks like over here. You can see that my drawing skills are a little bit, wiggly like that. I can use several tools such as a rotation table to help me as well. So I can do that and rotate the table like this in order to be able to follow the line a bit nicer. I can also turn on the auto light table. Now the auto light table will allow me to focus on the layer that I'm in and sort of like dim all the other layers. So that gives me a good way to focus on my line. So as you can see, I can carry on drawing like that using the brush tool. If I want to modify that tool, I can go to the contour editor. Remember, this is a vector line. So being a brush line, you have the contour on that line, and you can actually modify the contour. You can use Bezier handles to modify the contour of this specific line. What we've improved inside of Storyboard Pro 20 is the fact that when you select a bunch of lines like this, or you're selecting an object within the drawing space, you may want to change the pivot point of that specific selection, right? So that you can perhaps pivot it from there as opposed to from the middle. Now, if you are doing the rotation like that, in Storyboard Pro 20, the pivot point will always stay within the selection of within the selection and stay at exactly the right place. So that's a nice improvement. And you've also noticed that as I'm undoing what I did, the pivot point still stays at the same place of the selection. So again, that's really, really great. If I unselect and reselect, of course, the pivot point resets to the center of the selection. That's because obviously it's a new selection now, it treats it as a new selection. But if I move it and do a change, for example, if I do a scale, you see that the pivot point stays in the right place where you left it. So that's a great new improvement. Let's have a look at the pencil line now, the vector pencil line. So this is the icon over here, and the pencil line is great in many ways. One of the things, of course, is that the pencil line has a center line information. So as I create these kind of lines for my rock here, you can see I'm not being very too careful, but don't worry about that. I'll get back to that in a minute. If I go close to those lines here and I choose the editor, actually it's not going to edit the contour of my line. It's going to edit the center line like this. And you can see that I can obviously modify the center line however I would like. That also allows me to, this type of line allows me also to change its size after the fact. So even if I've drawn it now, I can go back and select that line and change its width, its thickness. So that is really great if you want to, for example, if some objects are becoming too far from the camera and you can't see the line and you want to increase that line size, or make the line smaller because now the camera is quite close. So that's really practical with these pencil lines. One of the really great thing here as well is that even if you've drawn a brush line and you go and you would like to modify the center line, just like you're doing on pencil lines, you can still do that by using the center line editor. You can see, remember, this is a brush line here, but I selected the pencil line editor. And now I can actually modify the direction of that line as well. And some improvement in Storyboard Pro 20 is the fact that when now you select the center line editor, you can add more points, which is something that we could do in Storyboard Pro 7 as well. But now we can also delete these points, and it will allow us to edit our line like that. Also, it will remember the selection. So when I deselect and I reselect, it will remember exactly what points we've got on that line. And on top of that, we can also change the center line smoothness. And as you can see, it will allow us to either smoothen our line a lot by creating a lot of lines, points, or less points to be able to make the line very, very smooth or very edgy. So you can now have the centerline smoothness with the centerline editor, which is one of the new features in Storyboard Pro 20. So back to our cleanup over here of our rock. And you've noticed that I went a little bit over the line here, and I don't need to worry about that because I can actually use the cutter tool to clean up these lines. And for those who are familiar with Storyboard Pro already, you know that you can use this tool to clean up like this and erase the lines that go over, not a problem. But now with Storyboard Pro 20, you can actually do that on multiple lines at the same time by dragging a line through both lines or multiple lines and actually cut all of them in one gesture. So that's a really neat new feature that we've added inside of Storyboard Pro 20. Okay, so let's have a look now at another great addition to the pencil line, and that is the fact that you can actually add texture now to a pencil line. If you go inside of the pencil line properties, you'll notice that there is now a new tab called texture, and you can now choose a texture for your pencil line. So you can choose a texture and now start drawing on there, and as you release, you'll see that you'll have texture on your pencil line. But what's also great is that you can select your line and actually change your texture after the fact as well. So you can go and choose a texture, a different texture for your line at any time at all to have the texture of your choice there. And you can do that over several lines. You can select several lines at the same time and change all of them at the same time as well. So that is a nice addition, bringing textures to pencil line in Storyboard Pro 20. And of course, for those of you who still want to use brush lines as opposed to pencil lines, you could draw with pencil because of its various advantages, but you can then also convert that line to a brush now, especially a textured one, so that you can still have the luxury of a brush stroke. So for example, here you can go to Tools, Convert Strokes to a pencil line to brush strokes. And you can see it retains the texture of that line as well. That's also a great new addition to Storyboard Pro in this version. Of course, that means that our brushes can also have texture. And that is, if you go into the brush tool and the brush properties, of course, you can go to the tips tab over here. You can choose your brush type to either a solid vector or a textured vector. And in the texture vector option, you can obviously choose any one of these textures that we have as presets, or you can import your own texture that you've created outside of Storyboard Pro or inside of Storyboard Pro. And then you can share all of these textures amongst your team members. So for example, if I use this tip over here, I can go and draw with that tip. And you'll notice that it's got a lot of texture on that, or it's got a texture on that, which is pixelated. So you can see it's a bitmap texture. But when I select the line, it's still a vector line, and I can still modify the contour of the line because this is an actual brush line, or I can go into the center line editor as well and also modify, the direction of the line if I want to do that. So it is really great to be able to still have texture with vector lines, but now you can have both. For pencil and brush line, you can have textures as well. In terms of drawing a storyboard, You'll be also wanting to use a tool that you've probably are used to if you're doing storyboard already, is what we call draw behind. And that allows you to actually create maybe some shading or maybe a matte behind certain objects. So for example, if I wanted to create a shading on this rock here, I could activate the draw behind tool and draw like this over. I'm on the same layer as before, but then as I release, it will actually go behind it. So let me choose a different color so that you can see that better. I do it like that, and you can see it's drawing on top, but when I release it now, it will go and sit behind those lines that were already drawn. And I can do the same over and over again, and it will go and sit behind those lines that were already drawn. So that's the draw behind tool. But one of the newest tools that we've got in Storyboard Pro 20 is the ability to also close a brush stroke and paint the inside directly. So for example, if I choose let me choose a solid brush here. So I'm going to go back into my property and go solid vector over here. And then just bring that down a bit. It's maybe a bit too big there, way too big. Okay, and then I'm choosing this dark gray, and I would like to maybe create a line like this over here, and you can see it's drawing it behind. But when I activate the closed, when I activate the autofill closed brushes and I do this, it will actually fill that surface for me. And if I go over here and add something else there, it will actually close that. As long as the line is closed, it will fill it for my brushes. And that's really practical there. Okay, so let's have a look at also bringing in possibly some bitmap inside of our drawing. You can, from scratch, build your storyboard with bitmap images. For instance, you can add a bitmap layer over here. If I click on this add bitmap layer, you'll see that now I've got the brush selected, my bitmap brush, and you can go into the settings and you'll find the same settings that you had in your textured vector line. And you'll also be able to bring in as many textures as you want and start drawing with that. Remembering that you can also add a whole bunch of things like transparency, maximum flow, minimum flow. You can play around with your opacity, anti-aliasing. You can add two tips, so you can combine two different textures together. You can also add a paper texture at the back of your line to make it look like there is a texture there, like it's rough or sandpaper or something like that. So you can add any of these textures if you want to within for your brush. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to bring in a bitmap layer already. So I'm going to just drag and drop it over here, take away the auto light table, and you can see that my bitmap layer, which is over there, is really blending in very well with my vector layer, absolutely no problem. What I'm going to do is maybe add a bit of shading on this bitmap layer here. So I'm going to choose the soft shading texture over there and maybe just add a bit of darkness on the side of the rock over there. And you can see as I add more and more of these lines, it becomes darker. So it's really working the shading pretty nicely, and I can go lighter on this side and darker on this side and keep adding more on that rock. And because this is a bitmap layer, if I select it, you can see it's only one object. It's not a multitude of lines, it's one object. What you are used to with other bitmap engines or bitmap softwares, it is exactly the same. and you can really create your nice textures and shadings inside of Storyboard Pro. Also, if you want to use a tool over and over again, and you don't want to be repeating all of these operations by changing the size and the flow and the opacity and all of that, you can create yourself some tools. This tool set over here allows you to create pen settings and tool presets. You can name them. You can choose. You can even choose an icon for it. You can choose a shortcut for it, and all of the stuff that you've already taken into account and changed will now be saved into that preset. So, for instance, here we've got a couple already. Got a rough pen, got a clean one for doing cleaning, one for doing shading, etc., etc., one for doing revisions. So you can create as many of these presets as you want to, and maybe you can share that amongst your team members as well, so that they can also have access to all these tools. You've noticed that my line, if I take this off for a second, you've noticed that my lines were very wiggly. Within Storyboard Pro, we've got different ways of making sure that your lines are very smooth. Now, of course, what you could do if you go into any of the brush or the pencil is you could go in the tool properties and increase maybe the smoothness of the line. So you could, for example, increase the center line smoothing of that line. And as you draw, if you draw like this, and when you release, it will actually smooth your line for you. So I'm exaggerating here slightly as to how I will draw this, and you can see the line is smoothing very, very nicely there. So that's one option of doing it. The other option, and I'm going to take this down completely to 0. So now my line, as you can see, is quite rough there. And I'm also going to make sure that I have no texture. So just so that we have a clean drawing there. And what we can do is activate the stabilizer. You can activate either an average stabilizer or a pulled string stabilizer. Let's start with the average. The average actually cleans our line and smooths our line as we are drawing. And as you can see, it is already smooth as I was drawing my line. Now, if I increase this, obviously it will be smoother, and if I decrease it to 0, it won't be doing anything to my line. The other option is pulled string. And the pulled string, as it indicates, is a string like this, and the moment you pull it, it will actually start now drawing on it, and you can have a very smooth line once again. What's really great about this particular one is that you can actually change direction. You can stop and change direction down, stop and do even a straight line, a straight corner like this. So that one is a good option if you have maybe some change of direction, like very suddenly. Of course, the weight of your line, the thick and thin of the line, all of that still remains the same. You can use the stabilizer for both brushed and pencil line. All of that is absolutely fine as well. If you want to erase something and you made a mistake, you can obviously use the other side of your pen, if you're using a tablet, as an eraser. So that works absolutely fine. You can see it's erasing my texture over there. Now, improved in Storyboard Pro 20 is the fact that you can change the size of your eraser by pressing the O shortcut and increasing or decreasing the size of your eraser, which is a new improvement now within Storyboard Pro 20 to be able to do that with this eraser on the other side of your pen. Okay, let's have a look at the line tool now, because the line tool is something that is also very practical when you want to do some cleanup. And you'll notice now that in the property of the line tool, we've got new options over there. First of all, the first option is obviously to create a line like that. And if you wanted to create a corner for that line, you would have to hold down command or control on your keyboards to be able to curve the line like this. Now in Storyboard Pro 20, we've got two more options. Either you can curve it without the need of a shortcut. So for example, you could draw the line like that, release, curve, click. Draw the line, release, curve, click. And that will create one single curve. Now, if you want to do an S, you can also choose the S curve over here, in which case, let's make this even thinner, in which case you can go draw, release, curve, click, second curve, click. So that's really, really practical there. Draw, release, first curve, click, second curve, click. And there you have your S curve on your line. Something new in Storyboard Pro 20 as well, if you look down at the bottom left corner of your drawing view, is that we've got new icons over here. First of all, we've got a drop-down menu for your filled grids. Now, an additional grid is 16 by 12 filled grid. So we've always had obviously the 12 filled grid, which is very, very useful. But if you're working, and most of us are now more and more working in 16 by 9, you can now add the 16 by 12 filled grid, which completely fills your 16 by 9 aspect ratio of your drawing and of your camera. So it still remains, it still remains a square, but it fills completely the 16 by 9 grid. Another new addition to Storyboard Pro 20 is the proportion grid. Now the proportion grid button is over here, and when you click it, you see by default we've got a 3 by 3 proportion grid. And this is really great for your rule of thirds. As most artists would know, the rule of thirds is quite important. In fact, we're not doing so badly here with our rule of third. But of course, the proportion grid doesn't stop there. If you want to change it to maybe a 9 by 9 grid, you can always go to the preferences, and in the camera tab, you can change it over here by grids, proportion grid, horizontal division, and vertical division. So you could actually make it any division that you'd like. But by default, it will be 3 by 3, which is what you would need if you want to look at your rule of thirds. So those are new additions for your grids in Storyboard Pro 20. Now our scene is starting to fill up here, but it's still quite empty. One of the things that we might want to do, seeing that this is a race, is add some spectators. So now the spectators, this is not necessarily on Earth, it might be in another planet. So the spectators are actually floating above in the air. So to do that, we're going to use a really, really cool tool. It's the stamp tool. Now the stamp tool is something that, for those of you who are familiar with Storyboard Pro already, is really great to maybe draw things that duplicate, or things that cycle, or things that you need to maybe create many, many instances of, such as rain, snow, forest trees, or alien spectators. So for instance here, if I go into the stamp tool and I look at the properties, you can see that I can change the scale of the whole thing. I can change also the minimum scale, the maximum scale, I can randomize the size. So if I want to make a forest and make it completely random as to some trees would be big, some trees would be small, it's very easy for me to do that. As you can see, I'm still using the pulled string stabilizer there, which works absolutely fine. So now I've created, some kind of forest with trees that are closer and some that are further away. But obviously, this time we don't want to create a forest. We want to create some alien spectators. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring into the scene a template with all my instances of my alien over there. And you can see, so to draw a stamp, all you need to do is actually draw all the instances that you want to have on separate layers, like so. As you can see, all the instances of my stamp tool are on separate layers like that. That's all you need to do. And then you need to select all of the layers that you want to make a stamp out of. Obviously, select the stamp tool. Let me just turn the stabilizer off. And then create a new preset just by clicking the plus button. We've already had one there, so we're going to call this one Aliens 2, like that, and click OK. So now you've got your new Stamp Aliens 2 tool over here. And all you need to do now is create maybe a new layer for your spectators and start drawing your spectators floating up in the sky. That might be one way you want to represent it, or you want to maybe randomize it a little bit. So you can go over there, maybe bring the scale down. A minimum scale will be quite small because maybe some of them are quite far. Maybe you want to randomize the size completely and also randomize the spacing so that they're not all next to each other all the time. And yeah, that's it. That should be quite cool. And now we're going to draw that again. And you can see the size is random and the distance is random as well. And here we go. So now we've got our nice little alien spectators up in the sky. So the stamp tool, really, really a great little tool that I'm sure you are going to love as you are using it in Storyboard Pro. Now let's continue on our journey to build our storyboard. And we're going to quickly look at the script. And it says that we are now, we've got one of our characters who's narrowing ahead, and each of them are plunging into the forest, driving on thick trees, branches, and bent over tree trunks. So let's actually bring that in. We're going to create a new scene, and you'll see how easy it is for us to create new scenes and new panels within Storyboard Pro. So we've got this, we're going to actually create a new scene altogether, and all the tools to do that are up here. And we're going to click on this one, New Scene. And we click it there, and you can see now the new thumbnail appears on our thumbnail view at the bottom there, and that represents a new scene. You can see the first scene was scene 1, 1 of 1, and now it's scene 2, 1 of 1 for the moment. Now, what you can do in Storyboard Pro as well as creating from scratch, you can also import images from outside, such as flat images or layered images as well, such as PSD files. So for instance, if you wanted to bring a PSD file, you could go into File, Import Images as Layers, and you go and find yourself your PSD that you need, your multi-plane background, for example, and you click OK. You can also go to your Explorer or the Finder of your computer, drag and drop that PSD file directly into your drawing, and it will work exactly the same. As it sees that it's a multiple layered file, it will ask you, do you want to keep the layers as separate? And you can say yes. And now you'll see that you've got your multi-layered file with the names that you've already created inside of the PSD file originally, as well as obviously all of the order that you've kept for your file. So everything is here in there as separate layers. What we're going to do now is also bring in our races, right? Because this is a race, so we're going to drag and drop our races onto that same scene, and you will see that we've got our races. So there's Nash there, edging forward ahead of the pack, and you can see that his is not really, there's no shading on his particular one, so we're going to actually go and create some shading on his. And to do that, we're going to generate a matte. So it's obviously you could use the draw behind tool as we did before, and you know, to create his matte, but we can also generate an auto matte. So to do that, we can now right click directly on the layer itself and go generate auto matte, which is an improvement also in Storyboard Pro 20. We had to go to layer, generate auto matte. Now you can right click directly onto the layer itself to find that tool. So now we're going to, you can change the color, you can choose a color for your matte, you can create it on a separate layer or on the same layer. We're going to create it on a separate layer and click OK. And as you can see, it's now generated a matte for our layer. By the way, you could do that on several panels at the same time by selecting all of them on the same layer on several panels, and also do that automatically in one click. So now we've got our matte, which is on a separate layer, and I'm going to show you a brand new tool in Storyboard Pro 20, which allows you to do some shading on certain layers. And that tool is now called the stencil brush. The stencil brush, if you go into the tool property window over here, let's just do that. You can see the stencil brush drop-down menu is right here. And we've got two modes. The first mode is a mode that you know already if you're familiar with Storyboard Pro, and that's the repaint brush mode. The repaint brush mode allows you to repaint any areas that are already painted. So for instance, if I wanted to take, let's say, a blue color over here and repaint the lines of this racer, I could go and draw it like this. And instead of the drawing that I've just did, it will just fill in with paint the areas that were already painted. So if I make this brush bigger, I can actually repaint all of these lines into that blue if I want to, or partly part of those lines like that. So that's the repaint brush. The new mode in Storyboard Pro 20 is what we call the overlay brush mode. And the overlay brush mode allows you to draw over a specific layer that you have selected. So for example, let's do some shading over here, and we're going to choose a soft shading there. And if I draw even over like that, and I'm not being too careful there because I've selected the matte layer, and when I release, you can see that it's kept it within the confine of that particular matte. So now I can add a little bit of maybe shading or dirt on the bottom part of my eraser over there. And I can even maybe do that up here, make my brush a bit smaller there and do that. And again, I don't need to be too precise over there, but it will still add it within my matte like that. So that's the stencil brush. And if you choose the overlay brush mode, or you can also choose the repaint brush mode over there in order to repaint things that were already painted. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add two more panels to this scene, because obviously we want to represent that our racers are moving towards the forest and inside the thick forest there. So I'm going to add two more panels. This time I'm going to add panels, not scenes. So you'll see the difference. If I click on this button here, add panels, I'm going to do it twice like that. And you can see the graphic on the thumbnail view is quite different. It's got actually scene 2, 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3. So now I've got 3 panels in my one scene. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to share my background amongst several panels. And you'll see how easy it is to do that with Storyboard Pro, because I don't want to be redoing, redrawing, or re-importing any of these. So to do that, first, I'm going to show you what we can do with the layers over here. First of all, a new improvement in Storyboard Pro 20, you'll probably notice, for those of you familiar with Storyboard, is that there is a scroll bar that allows you now to scroll up and down your layer list over here. So I'm going to select all the layers that pertain to my background, and I'm going to merge them all together, which is something that is very easy to do, merge selected layers. Now my background is one layer. I'm also going to rename that layer, very easy as well. Double click on the name itself and rename it. Maybe let's call this one Forest. And click OK. So there you have it. I've got my layer over there. So I could, if I wanted to, now spread this layer over the other 2 panels so that I can have exactly the same background. To do that, I can, if I want to, drag from the thumbnail view, I can drag the layer, as you can see, these are the layers there. I can drag that layer into this over here at the back there, and there's my forest into the second panel. And I can repeat that operation over there as well to have it into this panel too. Now, that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is also by sharing that background, because if I make a modification into one, maybe I want the modification to be present in all 3 of my panels at the same time. So I'm going to undo that. And I'm going to, rather than doing it the same way, I'm going to right click on my forest layer over here, and I'm going to say share drawing. Now, if I go into my library, you'll notice that there's a shared folder over there. And if I go into that shared folder now, you see the forest, which we've just recently shared. Now, it's now easy for me to go from the library and just drag and drop that layer inside of the panels that I want them into. Okay, so now you've got our layers in all the other panels as well. Now, the advantage of that shared layer, and you can see there's a little asterisk on that layer over there, representing that it is a shared layer. The advantage of that is if I can go on any of the panels with that layer on, and I can add something to it. Let's say I draw a new tree over here, and of course, I need to make sure that I've got a proper brush there. Let's just make it a solid vector like that, and make sure, let's say it's black there. And if I want to add maybe a new tree over here, and is that on the other layers as well that are shared on the other panels, it's also updated my layer. If I want to unlink a shared layer at any time, let's say, for example, the middle one, I want it to be different, I can always right click on that and say unlink from shared drawing. And that specific one only, the other 2 will still be linked together, but that specific one is now unlinked and independent from the others. So that is how you can use the shared folder or the shared capability to be able to duplicate your layers and still have them change all at once if you want to. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is maybe add some more scenes to our storyboard. Now, the thing is, you can stay in this workspace and keep adding more scenes and panels, but you can also use different types of workspaces. For instance, at the top here, you've got this workspace, which allows you to organize your storyboard. This is the overview workspace, and you can see we have our panels that we've created there. We can bring in new panels in here, new scenes in here. You can create from scratch like we've been doing, and you can organize your storyboard in here. Let's bring in a new scene. We're going to bring in this one here, and we going to, as you bring it in, you can see that there's different ways of doing this. You can perhaps add it in between scene 1 and 2. Perhaps you want to attach it to the end of scene 1 as new panels, or at the beginning of scene 2 as new panels. But for this one, we're just going to bring it here as a new scene after. So we're going to call this scene 3. And we're going to also renumber the selected scenes and all the scenes subsequent to that one. And that is a tool that you can do not only while you import, but you can do at any time. You can, in Storyboard Pro, rename your scenes and your panels at any time. And so this is a great view to organize your storyboard and your different sequences, scenes, and panels in here. Okay, so let's dive into the other workspace that we've got. And we've got two workspaces here, which are pretty much the same. One is the horizontal workspace and the other one, the vertical workspace, or the other way around. If I go into the vertical workspace there, you'll see that you have the typical storyboard and then the captions at the bottom. So actually, some parts of the captions that are filled. And this is where you would actually fill in your script into your captions. So for example, if we go to the next scene here where there are dialogues, you can see that there's the caption of the scream, and you can see a caption, maybe you can go to your script over here and maybe fill it in. And to fill that in, it's very easy. You can see there, what did you do over there? You can actually type something in here directly to fill that caption, or you can actually bring in part of your script in there. So for example, if there's an action note that is missing or that you want to add, just select it in your script, drag and drop it in there. And it remains intact on this side, so your script always remains intact there. You can also add notes if you want to. You can add as many captions as you want, and as well as a sketch caption as well. If you want to maybe add something else in there, you can actually draw something in the sketch caption to maybe represent a specific thing, like the director wants to leave a sketch for that specific panel. You can do that as well if you want to. Okay. So let's carry on by showing you one of the great tools that allow you to create layouts. I'm going to go back to my drawing workspace over here and select this specific drawing, where we're going to be creating the inside of our spaceship over there. We've got one of our guys, Sowala, which is, we can see inside of his spaceship. And this is a rough representation of our spaceship. We're going to be doing some cleanup, but we want the perspective to be right. So we've got what we call the Guides tab over here. And in the Guides tab, you can add as many perspective guides that you want. We've got everything from rulers all the way to 5-point perspective fisheye, as well as isometric if you are working mainly in gaming, for example. And you can actually bring these in, modify them, save them so that you can reuse them at any time or share them amongst your team members. For example, here we've created one for the specific spacecraft over here, and this is a 3-point perspective. You can, if you want to, at any time, just go and change the vanishing point positions and all of that. That's absolutely fine. But in this case, you'll see that on my drawing cleanup over here, let me just put the auto light table on, I can go and now clean up and use this tool to do with the perspective for my spaceship. So that's really, really practical, especially when you want to do some layout for your storyboard, to be able to use these guides. So I highly recommend that you have a look at all the different types of perspective grids that we've got, and play around them, and you can save them again and share them. If at any point you want to turn them off and maybe do something that is not going to be following a guide, that's absolutely fine. Switch it off and back on again to carry on with your perspective. Very easy to do so. Another great tool for Storyboard Pro is the ability to draw some animation and to see what your animation will eventually look like. So for example, if we look at one of these races over here, and I go into one of these thumbnails over here, you'll see that we're busy with our racer, and you can see that there's some kind of animation like that. So let me just turn off auto light table there. And you can see that our racer is doing some great animation on a branch like that. Now, if you were to add a new panel in between there, you could go and say, add new panel over there, and that will create a new panel in between panel 7 and panel 9 there. Now you would want to maybe add a new animation in between those two. To do that, you could activate your onion skin. And the onion skin will allow you to see a certain number of drawings before and after. For example, I can say 2 drawings before and 2 drawings after. So you can actually do that and maybe concentrate on certain parts that you want to actually see. So the onion skin tool has been improved in Storyboard Pro 20 to have an additional option. If you go into the Storyboard Pro preferences, into the camera tab, you can see that we now have an onion skin and light table section. We've got a new drop-down menu that allows you to choose which type of onion skin you would like to have. Let's leave it on colored. And then we've got a new option here called lightness as alpha. So let's have a look at what it looks like without that now. So if I go into here and I select my tree over there, you can see that we've got our tree looking like this. So if I select that guy, I can see the tree like that, and the colors are like one big color. But if I go to preferences and change that to lightness as alpha and click OK, now you should be able to see that you can see the actual difference in color altogether. You can see the darkness over there and the lightness over here. So it's really, really great to be able to have that, that difference of color by selecting lightness as alpha. Another option as well in the camera tab for the onion skin is the fact that you can now have your onion skin over your drawing as opposed to under. And that's also a preference that you can change within your preferences. So onion skinning is really great, obviously, to be doing some animation and to see how it's going. You can obviously extend your onion skin if you want to see more than just 2. So if you click on the extend onion skin and it brings up this window, expand onion skin there, you can go all the way to 15 drawings if you need to, and expand to see more and more drawings if you need to be doing that. I'd like to talk to you as well about a new tab that we've added in Storyboard Pro 20 that is the model tab. Now, if you want to be coloring something, for example, you would like to color this pod, and I can use any of my color tools over here. Obviously, I can go into my color palette, and I can choose any one of the palettes there, maybe the blue, and paint that pod a certain color. But if you want to be using something that's like a model, for example, you could do that in the model view. So for instance, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually bring the library over there, library tab over here to give me some space. And I've got the color model over there already. So I'm going to open the model view. And in the model view, I'm just going to drag and drop my template that already exists of my model. I can do that by also using any one of the layers. For example, if I wanted to bring this one in here, I can also do that directly within Storyboard Pro. I don't need to use something from the outside. But in this case, it was something that is already done. So I can now select any one of the colors over here. So I'm going to go on there, select that color, and then go and paint my wheels like this, and paint the wheels that I need to. Oops, I went a bit over there. And I can select this color there, paint the wheels over here, and paint the wheels over there. So it's very easy for me to do that by selecting from the model view. Oops, keep going over. It also works with textures. So if we've added a texture to this particular model, I can select that texture, even if that texture was not in my scene to begin with. I just select it and apply it to this particular model. And as you can see, it works perfectly fine. So if you want to modify that texture, that's also very easy, and you can go into Edit Gradient Texture like this, select it and modify it, and maybe make it smaller like that, maybe give it a rotation like this. Whichever you would like to do, you can modify the texture. But now you brought the texture in just by using the model view. So this view, very practical, brand new in Storyboard Pro 20, the model view, which you can activate from the tab list over here, or also switch off if you don't need it anymore. Okay, now that we've added a few things here, let's have a look at what happens with our storyboard. As I'm creating these scenes and these panels in my storyboard, you'll probably notice that Storyboard Pro has actually put all of these panels on a timeline. If I look at the timeline workspace over here, you'll now notice that I've got still my drawing view, still my library and all of these views on this side, but I also have a timeline view on which all my panels have been added. And this is done automatically for us. And this allows me to now time my storyboard into an animatic. So I can change the duration of my panels. I can swap them around. I can do a whole bunch of things in here that will make an video edit version of my storyboard, which is called an animatic. And in an animatic, it is common to animate the layers to represent movement. So for example here, and this is why it's very good to actually separate your objects on separate layers, because in Storyboard Pro, you can animate the layers separately. So you can see two of these ships are animated driving towards the precipice over here, and one of them is not animated yet. So we're going to animate that very easily. You're going to select the layer that you want to animate. You're going to go and select the transform tool. You place yourself where you want to start. Maybe you want to start at the very beginning. So we click on jump to the beginning of that panel. And we're going to go into the tool property and add a keyframe over there. Now there's a keyframe there. Maybe we're going to go to the end of that panel and add another keyframe, or just move it into position. And as I move it into position, as you can see, it's also created the path for me, so I can see where my layer is going to go. And here you have it. you've got an animation. If you want to modify that animation at any time, maybe add a keyframe in between and maybe move it, you can move it and you can see that it's curving that path for you. So it's very easy. You can also jump from keyframe to keyframe and maybe add some editor by activating the function editor over here. Adding maybe some ease in and ease out on very specific paths, X, Y, Z, or velocity only, or all of them at the same time. You can select that and you can maybe add some ease in and ease out on the specific keyframe or on all the keyframes at the same time. So you can go and make it quite sophisticated if you need to into the function editor. You can also, of course, erase a keyframe at any time and retain that. Like that. If you want to, you can extend the animation over several panels. So for example, if I were to duplicate this panel, maybe I want to duplicate it twice like this, you'll notice that in my timeline, it's going to obviously repeat because it's a duplicate panel. But I can very easily extend an animation over time. So for example, I want to do that for my new animation that I've created. All I need to do is go to layer, spread layer motion over there, and it will ask you how many times you want to extend it, or to all the panels in the scene. I'm going to say to all panels in the scene, like that. And now you'll notice that my guy is actually moving very softly and very slowly, but over the 3 panels instead of 1 panel like the others. So it is that easy to create layer animation. A new feature in Storyboard Pro 20 is the ability to animate the transparency of a layer. So of course you knew, if you were using Storyboard Pro before, that you can change the opacity of a layer at any time. But now you can actually animate that change of opacity. Let's do that on our D layer here, that guy, and see how that works. So for example, again, I can go to the beginning maybe of my scene and add a keyframe to my opacity like that, and then go maybe to the end of that panel and add another keyframe there. So let's jump to the first keyframe and drop the opacity to 0. And that's it. And now you can see that my layer is appearing as the opacity has changed. So that's a great addition, the ability to animate the opacity and the transparency of a layer. That's not all you can do, obviously, within Storyboard Pro. You can also animate the camera. So the camera is always there. All you need to do is select the camera tool and see what the camera does. And you can position the camera at any point, maybe zoom in and zoom out. But you can also animate that. You can animate by creating keyframes. Once again, maybe keyframe at the beginning of that panel and at the end, like that. And maybe I want to take the red one and maybe zoom into the view over there so that the camera actually moves like this. And if you want to, you can also like hide whatever is outside of my camera to be able to see it nicely like that. And there's my camera move. If I want to, I can, again, at any point in time, I can add a keyframe there and move it. And you can then have a curved camera path. If you want to extend it over several panels, it's very easy. You go to the timeline and you can just drag all of these to the end of your scene. Or you can grab a keyframe and move it in time. It's very practical. So now you've got your camera move extended over several panels and the ability to add and remove keyframes whenever you need to as well. So adding animation to layers and camera is very simple. When you add animation to a camera, you can also see that it creates marks like this to represent that there's a camera move, even if there's a curve. And those marks and annotations will be visible when you export your storyboard to a PDF, so that you don't need to do that manually. It already has registered that, and you can make those visible when you export it to a PDF.